You know, Star Ocean is a series that I've always noticed from afar. Up until this point, I'd never played a single title in this long-running franchise, although I was kind of familiar by proximity. I'd seen the games on shelves, in digital storefronts, in ads, and in magazines many years ago. Unfortunately, there's so many games out there, but just so little time to play them all. The Star Ocean games have long sat buried deep within my ever-growing pile of shame, until now that is. A short time ago, at the tail end of September 2022, a demo for Star Ocean: The Divine Force landed on consoles. Needless to say, it caught my eye, so I played through it and I even made a video on it giving my first impressions. Overall, I enjoyed the demo and I have to say I was really looking forward to diving into the full game and discovering where the story would take me. At this point, I've played through the entire thing and I've had a few days to reflect on the experience. Honestly, I've been kind of struggling to find the words to accurately describe exactly how I see this game, and I kind of feel like I might end up rambling later on in the video. I want to make it abundantly clear that I don't dislike it, I just don't think it's what I would call stellar either. I feel like if you've played through the demo, then you've sort of played the entire game, minus the story of course. When the game began, I was really interested in the characters and the world they inhabit, but as time went on, the entire package felt increasingly hollow to me. I personally found that the combat became very stale towards the middle of the game, as did the exploration, and this is coming from someone who usually enjoys repetition in games. Not to put too fine a point on it, but the entire game peaked for me within the first maybe 3 to 5 hours, and after that, I hate to say it, but I gradually lost interest. And look, I know all of that sounds harsh, but I wouldn't exactly tell anyone not to buy it. I believe it's actually a decent game underneath. It just wasn't able to keep my attention, which is something that's going to vary from player to player. It's not really doing anything offensive, and I can't in good faith class it as actively bad either. In fact, I'm sure that if you can latch onto the characters and the story can get its hooks into you, you'll probably have a much better time with all of it than I did. So what is Star Ocean: The Divine Force? Well, it's a Japanese action RPG developed by Tri-Ace and published by Square Enix. Like its predecessors, it's very much a space opera with a relatively large cast of characters to get to know and a variety of locations to explore. The game features a semi-open world structure with lots of large open areas, cities, towns, and dungeons connected by very brief loading screens. The characters are portrayed in an action figure style that's apparently by design and a bit of a hallmark for the series. It's actually something that I wasn't aware of until I played the demo about a month ago. Combat encounters are real-time, fast, frenetic, and highly customizable. Every single swing of every single weapon by every single party member can be customized from a pool of skills that you unlock via each character's skill tree. You'll be able to purchase attack skills, active skills, and passive skills, all of which can be equipped in any order that you choose and upgraded to make them more useful and more potent. Very early on, the main protagonist Raymond Lawrence unlocks the ability to use the Doomer unit as part of the story. This advanced flight tech allows Raymond to dominate in the sky. It adds some incredible maneuverability to his battle strategies, opening up surprise attacks and blindside attacks which can stun enemies. And so that's a broad and quite simplistic overview of what the game contains, but now let's take a look at each aspect of the game in finer detail. At the very beginning of the game, you're asked to choose a main character, and as far as I understand it, Raymond Lawrence is sort of like the default main protagonist. Choosing Leticia as your main character simply tells the story from her point of view instead. This changes a few cutscenes here and there, although a lot of them will be the same regardless of who you pick, as the two characters are together quite often. I suppose if you want the full context of every situation, you would need to play through the game once with each character, but having said that, there are also different endings to consider. I obviously didn't play through the game multiple times in order to unlock and see all of the various endings, but they are a feature of the game and they are worth noting. Selecting Raymond begins the story aboard a spaceship known as the Aegis. Raymond is the captain of this particular ship and he's currently overseeing a very dull and uneventful cargo shipment. They soon stumble upon another ship from the Pan-Galactic Federation which attacks them out of the blue, causing major damage to the much smaller and ill-equipped Aegis. A navigator called Chloe escapes the ship in a drop pod alongside Raymond, albeit in a separate pod, and they head down to the nearest planet's surface in the hopes of being rescued. Unfortunately, their pods are struck by some sort of electrical field, knocking out communications, and ultimately they descend in very different directions. Once Raymond lands, it isn't long before he's attacked by some sort of large monster, and he has to be saved by two helpful locals, Albert and the other main character, Leticia. The story then takes off from there, and as usual, I'm deliberately leaving out certain information and being vague about some of the characters to avoid spoilers. I suppose you could break the game down into three main sections: exploration, combat, and customization. Firstly, let's talk about how you explore the environments and navigate the semi-open world. As I mentioned earlier, each area is essentially its own zone, and all zones are separated by a very quick loading screen. A lot of the space you explore in the wilderness is rather open, but doesn't involve much in the way of verticality. You'll often be running across a vast and expansive plain, or perhaps traipsing through a deep, spacious canyon. As you might imagine though, this isn't always the case. Some areas are just small dungeons with tight hallways, and some are large caves with rooms connected by little tunnels. The game's cities and towns are another exception and often feature a great deal of height, width, depth, and detail. There's a lot to see and do in each of the game's settlements, including side quests, vendors, story progression, Duma crystals to collect, loot chests, and even NPCs will challenge you to a game of Esoa, a fictional collectible card game that exists within the game world itself. Sadly, there isn't really much to find outside in the broader world, except for some Duma crystals, the odd loot chest, or a pack of enemies to fight. Exploration is helped by the addition of the Duma flight unit, which you do get your hands on relatively quickly. Normally you can run or sprint around the world at a decent pace, but the flight unit allows you to explore most of the environments much more easily. The Duma does not require any resources to use it outside of battle, and it's the key to discovering hidden loot and of course more Duma crystals, which we'll get to in a moment. It's worth noting that if you really don't want to run or fly to faraway places, you can initiate a fast travel, although the game does warn you that you may miss out on some minor interactions between some of the characters. The game does of course have a map for both indoors and out, although unless I'm mistaken, I'm pretty sure that side quests are not shown on the map at all. I believe you're expected to just go to the place that the side quests mention and hope to find the things you're looking for. So what happens when you actually come across some enemies? Well, I believe in some of the older Star Ocean games you would need to collide with the enemy in the overworld, and then you'd be taken to a battle screen, which was sort of like a small arena. It's definitely a similar idea in the Divine Force, but instead of being taken to a separate screen, it's a seamless transition from exploration to battle and back again once combat concludes. As standard, your attacks will generally auto-target one of the enemies that you're looking at, and at that point you can initiate a hard lock with the press of a button and also adjust your target using left and right on the D-pad. Larger enemies and some bosses actually allow you to target specific body parts in much the same way. These body parts can be destroyed in order to weaken or completely remove some of their abilities. There's also some parts that will just naturally take more damage as well, basically like a weak point. I did test the combat and battle systems on easy mode, and for the most part you really won't have to worry about anything. You won't need to strategize or aim for specific parts or even command your party. You can literally just hack and slash at the enemies with Ray and be done with it if that's what you want. On normal, however, you'll have to be a little bit more careful, and in my experience there will be some random difficulty spikes as well. Pretty much everything you do in the game can be customized in some way to your specifications. I played the game on PS5, so during a battle all of my attacks were mapped to square, triangle, and circle, which would be X, Y, and B on an Xbox controller. Tapping the button executes a combo and holding the button down performs a single move. The important thing to know is that every attack within a combo and the single move are all set by the player. As you fill out more of the character's skill tree, more attacks become available to you, and you can then choose exactly where those attacks sit in the combo chain. You could leave out attacks that you don't particularly like, or even equip 3 of the same basic attack if that's what you want to do. Every offensive move that you make in the game during combat requires AP, which is the green segmented bar in the middle of the screen. Some attacks cost 1 segment, some cost 2 and 3, and so on. So ideally you'd want to equip attacks that don't drain more AP than you have available, otherwise the combo simply won't continue. If you've got 6 AP available and you equip 3 attacks costing 2, 2, and 3, the third attack in that combo simply will not activate as it costs 1 more AP than you currently have available. The only way to regen your AP is to stop attacking for a short time, sort of like the stamina bars from Elden Ring or other Souls-like games, and just like with those games, it's designed this way to stop you from constantly attacking. You'll also have the ability to equip up to 3 passive abilities, which are again unlocked on each character's skill tree. Every single node on each tree is unlocked using SP, and once a passive is unlocked, you can set it and upgrade it as you see fit using more SP, which by the way is gained from battles. Now obviously your characters gain XP, level up and become stronger, as is the norm for an action RPG, but SP is gained alongside that XP. SP doesn't just upgrade your passives either, you can use it on your attack skills in your combos and on active skills as well. As I mentioned a few times earlier, you'll be collecting quite a few purple Duma crystals as you explore the game's various locales. They can be found pretty much anywhere in the game, including towns and cities. They're used in pretty much the same way that SP is, although they only work for the Duma unit itself. This device has two skill sections to begin with, which are called Field Skills and Battle Skills. All you need to do is spend your Duma crystals on unlocking skills from either section, and then you can equip them afterwards to start using them. You can also use the crystals to upgrade the potency of any skill that you've unlocked. You're only allowed to set 1 field skill and 3 battle skills at a time, but they can be changed whenever you like, so you aren't locked into anything. During combat, the Duma allows Rey to fly quickly across the battlefield, blindside enemies to stun them, and launch a surprise attack at the start of a fight. Every use of the Duma within a battle requires the use of the VA gauge, which is the thin bar under the green segmented AP bar. It depletes as you use the Duma and regens as you land attacks or take damage. Each of the playable party members can be equipped with an array of different weapons, armor, and accessories to provide buffs to their base stats. This is presented in a very similar style to many RPGs, where you're expected to buy the best gear that you can afford for your team as you progress through the world and visit new places of interest. You can sometimes discover a good weapon or item in a hidden loot chest, but generally you'll be purchasing what you need from vendors. All of the gear that you find or buy is static, meaning it is what it is and it doesn't roll with random stats or anything like that. It's best to think of the gear as a permanent upgrade rather than loot. Once you discover and equip a new weapon that's just plain better than your old one, there's really no reason to hold on to the older one whatsoever. Lastly, in terms of technical performance on the PS5, you've got the ability to prioritize resolution or frame rate. I of course chose to prioritize frame rate for my main playthrough, which targets 60 FPS. I've heard that the game feels very slow and choppy when you go for the graphics mode option, but that's usually how it goes on modern consoles. There's also the option to choose between English or Japanese voice acting, and as usual, I went for English in this scenario. That said, the lip syncing does seem to be tied to the Japanese voice track, so it can look very odd sometimes. Star Ocean: The Divine Force is available right now for PS4, PS5, Xbox Series consoles, and PC. Physical copies are widely available. Now we get to my personal thoughts on the game, and as you can probably tell from the intro, I simply wasn't that into it after the first 3 to 5 hours. I think I do need to reiterate that I don't think it's a terrible game, it just didn't click with me, that's all. I mean, I did finish the game, and let me tell you, if I had have hated it and thought it was wasting my time, I absolutely would have quit playing. I've actually been seeing quite a lot of mixed reviews for this, and I think if you were to ask me the question, would I recommend it? My answer, putting it as simply as I possibly can, would probably be something like, yeah, it's alright I suppose. I've seen a lot of outlets giving it 8s, 7s, and as low as 5s, so there doesn't really seem to be a firm position for it at the moment. I don't do scores on my channel, as most of you know, but if I saw the game sitting at a 6 or a 6.5, I'd think that felt right, at least as far as I'm concerned. So let's get into some specifics. I want to quickly mention the issues with performance that I encountered. Some of you might remember in my demo impressions video, I mentioned that a certain area in the early game really tanked the frame rate, but I'm happy to report that it's no longer the case. That area actually seemed like a stable 60 FPS with only a couple of minor hiccups, so well done to them for that. Thing is though, the further I got into the game, the worse the frame rate became in certain areas. I think there was maybe 3 or 4 later game areas that drastically tanked the frame rate, and it wasn't a small hit either. I'm talking down from 60 to below 30 in some cases, and each instance of those drops was lasting for, anywhere from 5 to 10 seconds. It was genuinely quite bad, and the funny thing is, almost all of those areas were indoors or underground in cramped corridors, so who knows what the hell was going on there. When looking at the game overall and my playtime, I suppose these performance problems were only a small part of the experience, but still they do need to be mentioned. Besides that though, I didn't get any crashes or glitches, but there are a few odd gameplay choices that I'd like to share with you. Firstly, I want to talk about the side quests. These were some of the most frustrating things that I've encountered in quite a while. You see, the game doesn't really give you any kind of marker in terms of where you need to go and what you need to do. One of the early side quests asked me to go and kill a group of monsters that had attacked somebody. It tells you to go to a specific region, so I opened up my map and looked at the huge open space only to find that there was no marker. So I tried to go into the menus and see if I could, activate the quest or something, but nope, I just don't think anything besides the main quest gets a marker. So I travelled to the area, which is rather large, and I ran around for a bit, flew up in the air, and after 15 minutes of looking, I still couldn't find it. I've finished the game, but I never managed to do that quest, or really any other side quest for that matter. I think I may have accidentally completed a few of them, but when I actively tried to follow one, I just could not find the right places. Now, maybe I was overthinking it and the solutions were actually more obvious than I thought. I'll be honest, that is a possibility, but for me, this is not the way to do a side quest system. I do enjoy games that don't hold your hand, but the side content here felt very missable and like it actively didn't want me to engage with it, so I didn't. Secondly, it's kinda hard to craft the party of characters that you want to use. Different members of the group jump in and out of your party constantly due to story reasons, and they're just sometimes completely unavailable. There was one section of the game where I spent a lot of in-game cash and a decent amount of time in the menus to gear up a specific character, only for them to leave the party in the very next scene. See, I could have spent that time and money on another character who actually stayed in the party, but by that time it was already done. I know that RPGs with gangs of characters often do this, but it was constantly happening, and on top of that, they seem to randomly have some of their gear removed when they leave. So when they become available again later on, I end up having to re-equip all of their stuff. Weirdly, it doesn't seem to happen every time, so perhaps it's just a small bug? I don't know, but either way, it did get annoying pretty quickly. So let's say you have a certain setup in mind and you're really going deep into the RPG mechanics and the strategy to build a cohesive team. I honestly don't see how you could do it that effectively. I'd sometimes have 2 out of the 4 members just vanish for a while and then have to use 2 characters that I didn't want to use that weren't geared up and hadn't had any unlocks on their skill trees. Certain characters will join your party with thousands of SP to spend as well, meaning that you need to go to their skill tree and unlock 20 to 30 nodes one by one for each of them. I was really hoping that the structure of the game would be more like it is in Tales of Arise. Those characters were virtually always with you, and I was able to form an actual emotional connection to them. I genuinely cared what was going to happen to them as if they were real people. Now obviously, I know they aren't of course, but you get what I'm saying. Most of the characters I met in this Star Ocean game might as well be called Person 1, Person 3 and Person 7. They just did not resonate with me at all, and that's a shame because I was interested at first. It's not like they don't have backstories, I think they're decently written and there is a lot of dialogue, but it just all failed to grab me unfortunately. The same thing happened with the copious amounts of environments that you explore throughout the course of the game. I was really excited to poke around and see what I could find, but as time goes on, you realise that there just isn't anything out there. Some of the areas look good and the skyboxes are gorgeous, but there's just nothing to be found. Yeah, there's some crystals, some loot chests and some groups of enemies to demolish, but after the first few areas, every place feels exactly the same with a different coat of paint. I kinda get the feeling that the game was much more ambitious than it actually turned out to be, and they just couldn't hit what they were aiming for. Like if you consider how Final Fantasy 15 was at launch compared to how it is now, it's like a different game entirely for the most part. It's difficult to really put into words, but it's kind of like they used up their budget, ideas, and time on the first third of the game, and then just rushed to the end. I don't know if that's the case or not, obviously, but it's certainly how it feels to me. Visually, I think a lot of the game looks pretty nice. There's some awesome looking vistas, and some of the cities are full of intricate little details, and to be honest, I feel like they're kind of the graphical high point. Some of the later areas are jaw-dropping. I won't show them here because, I don't want to ruin it, but there's a capital city that feels like it goes on forever. Walking its streets was definitely a highlight for me, but when the game makes you walk the full length of it back and forth multiple times in a row just to talk to different NPCs, even that starts to lose its charm. I personally don't mind the character models, and it didn't take me long to adjust to their quirky designs. As I mentioned earlier, they are purposefully designed to resemble action figures, and if that's what they were going for, then I think they achieved it. The male characters are all chunky and beefy, while the female characters are attractively presented. For me, that's a very good thing, mainly due to my history on this channel of showcasing fan service games and many waifus. Chloe is really cute, Nina, who you meet at the end of the demo, is very bubbly, and Elena is kinda like this game's version of Android 18 from Dragon Ball Z. To be fair though, if I designed an android that I had to be around all of the time and look at all day, I'd probably make it look like that as well. I'm just saying, The gameplay side of things started off really well for me. I was enjoying the combat and I liked switching between the characters, and I thought the customization suite was excellent. Over time though, I just found that everything lost its luster and became less and less interesting to me. It's really hard to pinpoint exactly why that is though. As I've said multiple times already, I don't think it's a bad game. There's really nothing wrong with it, but I struggled to really care about what was going on despite my best efforts to engage with it. I ended up settling into a routine of just mashing the square button combo that I'd set up because it was the quickest and most powerful one that I had, and once I got halfway through the game, I just stopped switching characters entirely. I basically just played as Ray and treated it more like a straightforward or simple hack and slash game. I'm someone who can play the same activity in Destiny 2 over and over, or play a Dynasty Warriors game for 80 hours without getting bored of it, but here, in the Divine Force, that just wasn't the case. The main story is around 40 hours long, and I was already starting to lose interest around the 15 or 18 hour mark. If you end up really liking the game and you want to do literally everything that's available to you, you're probably looking at closer to 70 or 80 hours, so there is a lot of content for players that really gel with the game. Unfortunately, as it turns out, I just wasn't one of those players. In my opinion, Star Ocean: The Divine Force is a decent game for the right type of player. It does what it's supposed to do, and it does it perfectly well. It just wasn't able to captivate me regardless of how much I wanted it to. Once again though, this does feel like a AA Square Enix game released at a AAA asking price. Value is pretty much always going to be subjective, and a perfect example of that exists between this game and Valkyrie Elysium, which I recently reviewed. They're both action RPGs, they both cost the same amount, and they're both from the same publisher. I personally enjoyed Valkyrie Elysium so much more than this, and it's very hard to explain why that is. It just kind of worked out that way despite me being equally interested in both titles. Ultimately, if you're a fan of the series and you want to pick this up, I think you should. Don't let my lack of enjoyment sway your choice in this instance. If the game felt overly poor in design and execution, I would definitely suggest avoiding it, but that isn't really the case here. The game genuinely feels fine and even great at times, but your tolerance and enjoyment of it will all depend on if the characters, the world, and the story can appeal to you. If you enjoy the video, I really hope you'll consider subscribing, and if you like what I do and want to help support the channel, please check out the first link in the video description down below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.